There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man.
A dimension of sound.
For the 150th time, you are not getting out of here. Please let me finish the Count of Monte Cristo.
A dimension of sight.
No change at all.
What? I think I look fine.
A dimension of mind.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a brand new podcast called The Fifth Dimension. I am your host, Nick Lapola, and I'm here with another person who may or may not be 2D. I cannot tell. The Twilight Zone has many different realities between space, time. I think there's an eyeball. I think there's a door in there somewhere. And the Fifth Dimension is a kind of run through of the episodes that is the very first original OG Twilight Zone. But before we actually begin, as I said in my kind of weird intro there, Twilight Zone is a huge series for me, always has been, and I always wanted to talk about it. I wanted to, do a deep dive into the series itself, and thanks to a certain 2D image of a person or a 2D trivial website, YouTube channel, I found somebody who also wanted to talk about Twilight Zone. So that 2D sprite, whatever you want to call it, is of course Trivial Theater. Triv, how you doing? Welcome to the first episode.
Oh, thanks. Not doing too bad. I'm happy to be here. Twilight Zone was always a big thing for me too. Spent several Halloweens and New Year's with the Sci-fi channel watching Twilight Zone marathon. So
Twilight Zone.
Now,
this isn't a song. No,
yes,
I think there's who was it that did the Twilight Zone song?
I don't know.
This is the kind of shenanigans you're gonna see throughout the next 158 episodes or whatever.
Oh fuck, you're gonna get so tired of me.
Oh, we're gonna be tired. We're gonna be yelling at each other. We're gonna be like, screw this, we're gonna watch Outer Limits or something like that. So
no, I'm a Twilight Zone bitch for life, man.
So before we actually begin this crazy shenanigans, this crazy journey through the Twilight Zone, you can reach me at Big Shadow 1138 at Movie Emporium for videos and all that good stuff. I will throw it to you, Triv. Like I said, we'll get better at this as we go along, but go with us for now. Where can they find you? Where can they see your videos at?
You can find me on Twitter at trivia_chick, and that's chick just CHIC. And then I'm also on YouTube at Trivial Theater. So quite the creative names there, I'll tell you.
So with that said, we'll go through kind of a little bit of history of the Twilight Zone. We're actually going to talk about the very first episode, which is Where's Everybody? If you don't know anything about the Twilight Zone, and a lot of people may not, it's written and created, and actually most of the episodes are written by Rod Serling. He was known for doing stuff like Playhouse 90. He's a war vet. He's actually, I don't know if you know, Triv, but he was born on Christmas Day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, he wasn't born on I don't know, the Friday the 13th or Halloween or whatever.
I'm actually quite surprised too, because you would think somebody that deals with very supernatural, crazy things in the world of television would be born on one of those days, but no, he's born on December 25th and died on June 28th, 1975. So he missed Star
June
Wars.
28th is definitely a weird ass day if you're talking generally. I mean, it's known for being just a weird day.
Yeah, and he did a couple episodes based on Christmas. I think he did one. It was called Night of something, but it was considered like Night of the Jackals. I don't remember what it was. But if anybody also doesn't know about Rod Serling himself, he was very progressive as an individual, was known for his very progressive looks into racism and war. And because he was in the war, he Tolkien was known for using a lot of his experiences in these stories that he wrote, in these scripts that he wrote. And you could tell as we go through the seasons and the series and stuff like that, a lot of the episodes deal with not only military, but deal with wartime stuff, and deal with it's going to be interesting to talk about. But I think Rod Serling was one of those individuals that was way ahead of his time, was a guy who really knew how to develop stories that had a lot of purpose and concepts and stuff like that. And when you watch these episodes, when we'll get into them, some of them are extremely prescient with today.
Oh yeah,
I
they're
like
timeless.
yeah, like how it's amazing. I remember, I think when I started pitching this to you as a series, I'm like, I remember the episode, the monsters are due on Maple Street, and it's about kind of what we're dealing with right now with
Yeah.
people and different sides of how people view things.
Oh
So for
yeah.
instance, yeah, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, for instance, the people are dealing with something like murder or something like that, and they
The
start fighting with
monsters
one another.
isn't that where they're all trying to get into the bomb shelter?
No, this is where they start accusing one another, and like of something going on around the neighborhood, and like the
Oh,
power goes
right.
out.
Right. Got it.
But there, I mean, there's other episodes that, there's episodes that deal with like Christianity, and it's going to be extremely crazy to kind of talk about, because there's so many tropes that are so inspiring to a lot of people. And when you go and you watch something like the Twilight Zone and you realize just how important that series is, it's going to be interesting to kind of delve into it.
Oh, agreed. Well, you look
Yeah.
at a few other things from that time, like it goes to show you that you can watch this and see that people don't change. The things that
Yeah.
they deal with today, they dealt with in the 60s, they dealt with in the 20s, they dealt with in the 1890s. The technology changes, but overall, people don't change.
Well,
And
that's
that,
what I was gonna say. You can look at the any episode of Twilight Zone, and there's stuff in there that you can, like I said, just pull out there and just throw out the American culture or the world culture today.
oh
And
yeah.
but I mean, I've been talking for a little bit. Well, what's your overall opinion? What do you have any information you want to throw out there about just your overall feelings on the Twilight Zone and all that good stuff?
Oh, I love the Twilight Zone. It was a massive part of growing up, and it kind of from an early age, kind of you saw the practical effects and what they did on. I mean, not that the budget was small,
Mm,
but it's still like it wasn't just. There were twists to the shows in a time when there probably weren't a lot of shows that were like that.
yeah,
You kind of had an idea of what was coming, but even if you knew, they still did it in an outside the box way. Even with this first episode, you can say, okay, this thing is going to happen, and something similar happens to that, but it still is something that was probably not heard of at that time. Like, I would have loved to have gone back and seen it live for the first time and see people's reactions, because for that
exactly.
time, by saying M. Night Shyamalan type twists, it kind of gives it that sour taste in your mouth. But like the twists that you get in like The Sixth Sense, even if you haven't seen the Twilight Zone, like the idea of gremlins on the airplane, that's still something that's talked about today. There's wishing someone into the cornfield. There's all these references and cultural touchstones that we talk about, and they have their basis here, or they're brought to light here, and I think that's amazing.
It really is. It's funny when you go back and think about just how crazy a concept, like you said, how I mean, we're talking about the 50s. This is a time when there's bomb shelters. This is a time when there's pure scared nature of the Cold War. I think it was coming, or was either happening at this time. There was,
It was in full swing at this point, I think.
yeah, so you're constantly worrying about nuclear threats and stuff like that. And when you look at like segregation in the 50s, I'm pretty sure Rod Serling was very aware of the nature, because he's born in the 20s, so he's very aware. He's like in his 30s at this point, but he's very aware of how sad and chaotic it really was. Not to kind of wax into the very sad nature of the 50s and stuff like that, but it was a very hot, contentious topic that was violence and against African Americans and
Yeah.
Latinos and Asians, and it's still present today and prevalent today. He created a lot of, especially after he came out of his wartime efforts, he was just very aware of everything that was happening, and it made him very he wasn't. He was a lot of times a lot like a lot of creators where they're not the friendliest of people, but what they're creating is very, very important. And
Oh yeah.
it's pretty impressive. He actually, I can't forget about this, but his pitch for the Twilight Zone was an episode called The Time Element, which dealt with somebody trying to somebody was trying to warn people about Pearl Harbor.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, somebody time travel and stuff like that. It's a really, I can't remember if it's on
Oh,
the first season.
I was gonna say there's an episode where someone tries to go back and kill Hitler.
Is there on the Twilight Zone?
I think so, yeah. It might be. I'm pretty sure it's from the 60s series.
I mean, it could be.
Or-
Like I said, I can't remember offhand, but like I said, a lot of these episodes I haven't seen for quite a while.
Yeah, same. Well, and another thing with the you look at this and you look at even the original Star Trek,
Mhm.
both series with Gene Roddenberry. You had a lot of that progressive nature, like Star Trek offered the first interracial kiss, and I'm sure that there was a lot of pearl clutching at that, and you get a lot of that here too. But that's kind of the great thing about the 50s and 60s, like the B movies that kind of related the fears of that era, whether you're talking the Cold War or different things like that. They did come to light, and they talked them through these sci-fi stories, and that's kind of the great thing about sci-fi of that era. It's a very specific kind of thing, but it runs throughout that entire era, and I think that's cool to see it in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it here in a second, but Where's Everybody, which is the very first episode, it deals with a lot of concepts that we fear today, even with his loneliness and stuff like that. But I just think it's impressive that a series 50, 60 years later can still be as relevant today. And even though some of the costuming isn't what I would call the best in a show, because it's very of the time.
Well, look at stuff from the 80s. I mean, you can go 20 years into the future and say that same thing about today. I mean, the progression of effects and everything else, but the concepts stay. And I guess that's kind of, no, agreed though. It's definitely, well, and two, just with the fact that it has stood the test of time. Not that like the 80s, I've not seen the more modern Twilight Zone, but like the 80s version, it was excellent, but I don't think anything stands up quite as well as the original series.
I think on a more political / having something to say, it doesn't. But there are some episodes in the 80s that I've told you about were really good.
Yeah.
So
totally.
We'll talk. I mean, maybe we'll go and talk about some of those episodes when we get to them.
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, and I think you had shows like it was like Monty Python set a lot of the tone for that kind of sketch comedy. And I think the Twilight Zone from the 60s did a lot the same. You had a lot of people that took that formula, were inspired by it, and did their own thing in the 80s. So, you have Tales from the Crypt and Tales from the Dark Side. And I think those kind of fall into that same realm of story.
Right.
Not quite the same, but in that realm.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting because, like I said, I think anthology series have always been my kind of go-to bread and butter when it comes to like favorite things to watch, because not only are they different segments for the most part in each episode, but they're as we'll see in especially this series, some big name people start getting involved with the Twilight Zone. And it was the same thing with Tales from the Crypt, where I think even Arnold Schwarzenegger directed an episode in that series. So it's interesting when you kind of look at it. But yeah, some big people, including the late Richard Donner, came into the Twilight Zone at some point. So
100%.
Yeah. So with that said, is there anything else you want to talk about, like with the intro to Twilight Zone? Is there anything that piques your interest that about or haven't talked about yet?
Well, I think and I know we kind of discussed this a little bit, but given the TV of the time, and I guess I didn't go back and do a lot of research on what else was on at that point. But can you imagine like sitting down on that day in the 50s or 59 and like seeing this for the first time? Because I don't think there was a lot out there like this at that point in time.
No, there really wasn't. The sci-fi that we were getting. Actually, would you call this? Let me ask you: would you call this sci-fi, or would you call it fantasy?
At that point in time, I think it would be considered more sci-fi.
You think so?
I think so. Like fantasy for me, and I guess because we had like Lord of the Rings and things like that, I would almost classify fantasy at this point in time as more like Disney and things like that. So you get like Bambi and kind of more whimsical. Like Twilight Zone is a lot of things. It's not really, there are a few episodes that are whimsical, but by and large, it's not really whimsical.
Yeah, it's like when they talk about Star Trek, it's definitely sci-fi, and when they talk about Star Wars, it's considered fantasy. So that's what I was
Really?
always
Oh, I didn't know that.
well, I think the reason they consider it fantasy, so when we go on, let me go off on a tangent,
Have at
is
it.
Star Wars. What's that?
Have at it.
Star Wars is a more fantastical approach to spacefaring than Star Trek. Star Trek's more grounded in reality. I'm not saying
makes
that.
sense.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we'll have Star Trek ships and stuff like that, but when you have like laser swords and you have the Force, it's kind of like Lord of the Rings where there's fantastical elements. I'm not saying there's not sci-fi elements because they're in space,
Right.
but for the most part, it's a fantasy in a lot of aspects. That's at least what I've been told. So
I could see that. Yeah.
yeah.
And I guess the
But
only other thing I would add is like you look at the soundtrack, and I know we're going to get more into it, but you think the classic Star Wars, you got me doing it. Classics Twilight Zone theme. You consider like what we consider to be like the visual open and the musical open, and like with this episode especially, you don't even have, like, originally you didn't even have Rod Serling doing the voiceover or the narration at the start. It was some other guy.
That to me is crazy to think about because you're so used to that voice, because like the something that's the most recognizable in TV history is Rod Serling's voice, and it's just so there's a cadence to it, there's a feel to it, there's a drive to it. When you go to, like, for instance, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, you listen to a guy recreate it and he does it so well, but there's just something that's missing. I don't know if it's just the fact, where is he from again?
It's not Rod Serling. That's what it comes down to. He had a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
specific voice.
I was trying to figure out where I think he's from New York. Yeah, he has that very New York accent to him.
Yeah.
But he had that cadence, and it was so good. It made you excited to watch each episode. And I know he became very I don't know what the word is called. As he went along after the fourth season, I know he became a little dejected, I guess you could say. But the other thing is the score is written by the famous Bernard Herrmann, which is really cool. He's of course creates the theme for Psycho, worked with Alfred Hitchcock, which
makes sense. Classic and memorable themes.
Exactly. He is to Twilight Zone what Danny Elfman is to The Simpsons, basically, is what I look at.
Very much so.
The first episode wasn't originally going to be the first episode. He pitched what was it?
It's called The Happy Place.
Yes, The Happy Place. You were telling me about this, weren't you? Like a little bit about it. What did it entail?
Basically, the idea is that once you hit the age of 60, your usefulness is considered done, and then you're basically killed. But the studio didn't think that was a good place to start because it was not, real happy, basically. And then, yeah, exactly. But he wanted it to kind of have that essence of sci-fi, like the heart of what a sci-fi movie was at that point. And I didn't look in. I don't think it talks further about like what the episode all entailed. All it said was that, okay, we're not going to have a bunch of people, our target our main demographic, yeeted because, people have enough fears of that kind of stuff.
Well, that's the funny part. When you think about it, the episodes that would come later, like, was the something man, the obsolete man, were this episode was that episode you're talking about. Man is considered obsolete, decides his fate, how he's going to die. So,
well, actually, just looking here, it was also so it was rejected for Twilight Zone, but it was adapted into a Star Trek episode and then later into Logan's Run.
Really? I haven't seen Logan's Run, but that's pretty funny.
I haven't seen it in a really long time. I have next to no memories of it. I'm not sure what that says.
It's your typical 70s. It's similar to like I don't know, THX 11838 and Soylent Green and
nice.
Yeah.
I hope they didn't say that Soylent Green is people. Logan's Run is people. Logan's Run is people.
That's the other thing about Rod Serling. He's also known very famously for writing an early draft of Planet of the Apes, which I think got turned. Cool. Somebody else continued it, but Yeah, he didn't actually. If I remember right, he actually didn't have the horse, or not the horse, but the Statue of Liberty stuff at the end. That was kind of added because he, like, I guess he kind of wanted to go off on his own, do his own thing. I'll
That's fair.
probably get called out for that, but I think that was what happened. But
Oh. Well, where would we be if we didn't have Charlton Heston going, "Damn you, dirty apes"?
good old Charlton Heston, gun club nut.
Well, he did his own thing.
So the very first episode that was released on October 2nd, 1959. I'm guessing they knew it was going to be kind of Halloween-ish. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I'm guessing that's what happened.
That could have also just been that's when the new season started too. Like that was like when their fall schedule started, maybe.
Shh, don't tell them that. Shh. This was also at a time when a season of television was 36 episodes.
Oh shit! Can you imagine? Holy shit!
Yeah.
Oh, it was all that was on. You had like whatever 3 channels at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
You could watch stuff about Geritol and then watch stuff about people and killing each other.
Well, you had your choice of there's actually a priest on at that time, and I'm trying to think. I think his name was Fulton Sheen. So you had your choice of a priest talking about like the ins and outs of being a good person. You had the Twilight Zone, and then whatever else, maybe Lucy or something. No, Lucy was on CBS as well. So
yeah,
because this was a CBS show.
Yeah, CBS was a giant at the time.
Well, I mean, all 3 of them kind of were, but yeah, it had some hard hitters. There's no doubt.
But a couple reception points. Where's Everybody? Like I said, is the title. Written by Rod Serling. I say Rod Serling for some reason, but it's Rod Serling.
Yes, no T.
But he wrote most of the episodes of the entire series. He was one of those people. Eventually, he brought in other writers, and like Charles Beaumont, who actually wrote one of the reviews in this.
Nice.
It's directed by Robert Stevens. Like I said, Bernard Herrmann did the original music. Joseph LaShield did the cinematography, and Roland Gross edited. Two reception or two reviews, I guess you could say. New York Times praised the episode, saying that Serling proved that science cannot foretell what may be the effect of total isolation. And we'll talk about the actual episode. Though the resolution seemed trite and anticlimactic, I actually kind of agree with that. But Charles Beaumont, who would go on to write some other episodes, he said in the magazine Fantasy and Science Fiction, writing that he read Serling's first script, old stuff, of course. I thought so at the time. But there was one element in the story which kept me from my customary bitterness. The element was quality, which would show later on many, many pages. Dialogue, all that good stuff. He basically was showing what Rod Serling was going to accomplish in his 5 years of doing the show.
Wow.
Which apparently they canceled the show, or he stopped doing it because he was tired of the network execs messing with his show. So.
Oh, and I'm sure that back then, I mean, at least from what I've heard about the original Star Trek, like the hard and heavy hand that they had on control was intense.
It's so ridiculous. I've always said, and you see it time and time again, the creator is always going to put the show first, and he's always going to make the best product he can because he wants to stay in business and make money. Rod Serling was not an idiot. He knew he needed money for his family, and you start seeing the networks get in there and get scared and start, chopping up the story or doing something stupid, and it causes rifts. And that's why good TV shows like, I don't know, Firefly or Once Upon a Time in America, that movie, get chopped up to bits because the studio execs think they know better. And yeah, it's terrible. But in the first season of this, you can start seeing a little bit of that problem, because he wanted to do The Happy Place, as we can see, and that didn't work out very well. So
but they were, I mean, and not that they're great now, but I mean, think about the pearl clutching of, I mean, you heard I remember stories about my grandma not saying the word damn. Like she'd say damn it instead of damn it. And I mean, it was just not to say that things are any different now, really, but I mean, it was a different era. Things were, you look at the 50s as being so incredibly clean and squeaky clean and stuff. I mean, that tells you all you need to know right there.
Yeah. And you can tell they definitely toned down a lot. You could tell that Rod Serling probably wanted the show to be more edgier than they allowed him. That's why the spaceships and the suits are clean, and there's a lot of sanitization of the series itself. If Rod Serling were here today and he were doing a show like this, I think the show would be much edgier. I think it would be much more off the rails a lot of times.
No doubt.
And I think it would be something in the essence of like a Westworld or something like that, where it's willing to take chances and go there. But at the time they had 3 channels, as you said, and this is what happened. But original pilot, the narration for the show was done by Westbrook Van Voorhees.
Yeah, something like that.
I'll just call him Voorhees, Jason Voorhees. Oh man, and he was the original narrator until I think Rod Serling officially took over. But there's a sixth. It reads, "There is a sixth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is mentioned of as vast as space, and as timeless as infinity." This already is very different than what you would typically hear in a Twilight Zone. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between man's grasp and his reach, between science and superstition, between the pits of his fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination in an area called the Twilight Zone. So already they're calling it the sixth dimension instead of the fifth dimension, which, as we've named our series the fifth dimension. So
well, fifth is better than the sixth. I mean, if we're being honest.
The sixth dimension is when you have that extra guy who comes in and pitches and helps you out, that type of thing. So
I was gonna say that's when you start growing like limbs out of your torso and stuff, but maybe that's just where I'm at.
Well, I mean, it was the 50s, so those crazy sci-fi movies that were coming on.
True. There were several blobs, odd people, and all that fun stuff. So
man, you definitely would know because you've seen quite more than I have. So
that time is my jam. I'll tell you, I love it.
And the televised pilot was more in line with what we know. There actually, it's not really too much different, but I think he still kind of changed it a little bit. It says there is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. It lies between the pit of man's fear and the summit of knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It's an area we call the Twilight Zone. So it is pretty much the same, but it is different than what you're used to if you know the Twilight Zone at all, because there's no there was more added stuff later on in like the 3rd or 4th season where it dealt with like there is a fifth dimension between sight and sound, and I think there's also light and shadow. But this is like an early take on the televised pilot. But what this does, and I don't know if you agree with me, is it sets up the show perfectly. It sets up the idea of mind, of sight, body, sound. It deals with like how you perceive fear, how you perceive the different takes of the world. It deals with the fact that the things that we know and are used to could be completely thrown off, I guess you could say, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think I always took it as the Twilight Zone was a realm outside of what we know, but it could be anything. Because you look at and not that you could tell from the first episode, but down the way, it can be like anything, whether you're talking about like the episode called Willoughby or the one with the toys in the thing, and it covers kind of whatever it's it is the definition of anthology, I guess, but it kind of covers whatever you need it to cover.
And you can kind of just in the middle ground between light and shadow, it's kind of like when you look over and you think you see something, and it's really just like your eyes kind of fixated on something that's not there, but you never know. It's like alternate dimensions or multiverses or whatever. There could be something there, you just don't know. You could see like I don't know, with like a reflection or something like that. And, it's just the idea of how your brain perceives things, and like what you just said, and how we just like I said, when you go into like, the racist or the war aspects of how it really affects, the difference, when you're fighting and how that affects you mentally and stuff like that, and how your perceptions change, and so on and so forth. So
Oh, definitely. Like even again, back to the Gremlin episode or the 30 terror at 30,000 feet. He keeps seeing something on the wing. Is it there or is it not there? Ultimately the plane comes down, but you don't know whether that's due to gremlins on the wing or the storm or mechanical malfunctions or what. It leaves it open as to what it could be, even though it's confirmed later what it is. So
yeah. And we'll go to another episode which we're going to talk about way down the line, which is, like I said, one of my favorite episodes, which is, like I said, the monsters are due on Maple Street. And at the very end of that episode, it's two observers who are testing the concept of man or women's logical thinking and how they perceive things when they're kind of put out of their norm, and how they act and how they are completely different types of tropes. And that's not, like I said, this first episode we're going to get into here in a second. I keep saying that, but that's what I truly became appreciative of the Twilight Zone itself, is when you watch an episode and you see, for instance, people outside of a mountain, and there's a old man in the mountain, and you don't know what's going on. You just have this old conjuring guy who just sits there and explains everything to them, and their thoughts and fears are kind of fully exploited, and so on and so forth. And they push themselves out, and they're fighting with one another, and they eventually kill all each other, and they go in there and it's just a computer. Well, it's just that test of their will and mind and body, and just how things are affected. For instance, you'll watch the news, and the news can shape who you are and stuff like that. And it just shows how much he was able to, maybe not as a psychologist or psychiatric person, but he was able to test the limits of what human mind can take, and so on and so forth.
Oh, definitely so. Well, and the whole story itself was based off of a Time article talking about what was going to be required of people that wanted to go into space. And I think it said that 2 years after this episode came out, the Russians sent the first guy into space. So it was such an era of growth and potential, and well, what about this and what about that? It was a fertile ground for drawing from real life and pulling it into these different things. Like It was a rich era of sci-fi.
Yeah, and that's always been the big thing about the 50s and 60s, was the space race. So it's kind of actually poignant and a little interesting, not interesting, but kind of, I don't know what the word is called, but a little kind of intriguing that the first episode of the series deals with space flight, because that was a huge thing. Like I said, the Russians were sending someone into space. We were trying to get there to the moon, and it very much asphyxiates on the fact of loneliness, because the episode basically is very simple, is not the most complex story you've ever seen, and it's a very good first episode. It's actually, to me personally, watching TV series, I think some of the best series openers are stuff like Lost, where they give you basically people on an island. Why they're on an island, I have no idea, but they're there for a reason. And it's one of the great pilots of all time. But this is the same thing here, where in essence this guy is just wandering through an empty town, similar to the town it looks similar to what's that town that they blew up, and they had Indiana Jones. It was the
oh yeah, it was right on the nuclear bomb range.
Yeah. Basically, this guy is in this town that looks exactly like that. So you're thinking that maybe, oh, this guy is in a town that they're going to use as a nuclear weapon. He had a drinking party or whatever that he forgot his whole entire existence. But he travels through this town and nobody's there. Nobody's there to feed him. Nobody's there to talk to him. And what's also very interesting, this is kind of a cool little Easter egg, is it's filmed in the exact same backlot as Back to the Future.
I was gonna say the courthouse looked just like the one from Back to the Future.
Yeah,
I think it was actually filmed. It was one of only 2 episodes to be shot on the Universal backlot. Otherwise, everything was shot at MGM.
Yeah, that the companies like it does, like Warner Brothers is sometimes shoot on Universal backlot or Paramount. So it's not like, why are they filming on another company's backlot? It's just It's because they have the space and the availability. But talking about this episode, we have this guy, like I said, he's traveling through this city or this town, no idea what's going on, no idea who he is. When you're watching this, and we've already talked a little bit about the ending, but we'll talk about like the episode. What was your overall take on this episode? What is, how did you view this episode as a kind of not only start to the Twilight Zone, but just kind of a really interesting kind of battle of a guy who's by himself with nobody, I guess you could say.
I think it was very well done. You kind of talk to yourself, you see things where there aren't things, and knowing that he didn't have anybody else to talk to, and there's only so much you can do. Like the mannequin thing was a little bit, seeing a mannequin from a distance, I can't think that you'd actually think it was a person. But given his state of mind, I can understand that. But I mean, they didn't go into, they asked questions that most people would ask, like, I don't remember who I am, but he goes through his pockets to see what he has. He's like, oh, American money. Well,
Yeah.
I'm American, and the idea of like there was a cigarette that was left, there was fresh coffee on, there was, ringing phones and all this stuff, and the disorientation he has when he gets stuck in the phone booth, all those things. I can imagine if you were like completely overwhelmed by the fact that you're the only person there. At one point they even reference the book The Last Man on Earth, which was the basis for things like the Omega Man and I Am Legend. And like you can see that little stir craziness that comes with being by yourself and only hearing your own voice.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about it, because the one thing I have problems with, and I'll admit to it, is I'm not what you call I have difficulty not wanting to talk to people, and I know it annoys people, but
oh, you're Gabby as hell, but that's okay.
Well, I try. No, but
it's endearing.
The thing that frightens me, there's two things that frighten me most: living in a world where you have nobody. There was actually a movie, I don't know if you ever heard of it, called The Day Without a Mexican.
I can't say that I have, but that doesn't mean.
Well, but there's like movies like that where you lose a whole entire population of a group of people. And how do you deal with the effects of that? Living in this town or walking through this town, having no idea who you are and having nobody. That's like living on an island with no rum. It's just
Nick, why is the rum always gone?
Where the rum gone? Nah, I figured I'd throw that out.
Should I put on the pirate filter for that one?
Yeah, if you want.
Hang on. Oh, there we go.
So where
Nick, why is the rum always gone?
We try, people. We try. Shit. As you can tell, this is the first episode. Nothing goes right in your first episode. Oh, man.
Hey, we're keeping it cool, right?
Exactly.
All right, I'm done being stupid.
But
blame it on the Twilight Zone.
Exactly.
I was entering my own personal Twilight Zone. That also explains my mouth going all weird.
But the first part of this episode is dealing with just his, trying to figure out what's going on. And he definitely has the 50s jive, when he talks, how he talks, stuff like that. When there's like a way these guys talk and the way they enunciate and pontificate things that is really, really, really goofy for us now because we have a certain way we talk now. But watching men in the 50s or the guys and gals in the 50s is just really, really kind of weird, I guess you could say, because it's just like, hey, dog, there's a guy hungry here. I have $2.80. I'm like,
paying customer.
Exactly.
Well, and I don't think they get it too much with this, but you go back a little bit in time, like a hamburger is a hamburger sandwich.
Exactly. It's so weird.
It is definitely a different level. Like there's a formality to it that obviously we don't have anymore.
Yeah. It almost feels like a more respectful, but there's also like that greaser attitude in the way they talk sometimes. And you'll see it in later episodes where the individuals will be like talking to each other. And he's like, like I don't know exactly what they say, but like, do you want to get rough or something like that, or do you want to
What a
we-
square.
yeah, exactly. And it's just funny to listen to, and that's what I love about it. But it was 1959, so
Yeah. Well, and two,
was-
you're not writing for, people that are 16, 18. You're writing for people in their 30s and 40s or on up,
yeah,
I would
actually,
imagine.
that's a good point. I don't know if the series was. I haven't really looked into it, but I don't know if the series was meant for was more popular with like the older folks, or was more popular with the kids.
I can't think it's going to be, oh, I don't know. Because you think about it, the popularity of like TV really didn't come into like normal family home use until the 50s. So more than likely you're
Yeah,
going to have at least slightly affluent, excuse me, you're going to have slightly affluent folks that can, buy a TV.
that's true. Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I suppose by 59 it would have been more, it's about like TVs now, like the really big fancy ones started out being thousands and now they're hundreds. So I would imagine it would be something similar to that.
Yeah, it's possible. I think TVs became more affordable about this time, maybe in the 60s. I think that's why series like this became good money makers for the TV networks, because more and more people were watching. They could sell more and more ad space. I mean, there's wasn't there a video you sent me or something like that where Rod Serling is like selling
Oh
like
yeah,
products?
he's pitching depending upon, and I I should have looked more into it, just general
Mm,
advertising at the time, but I didn't. But like you had some shows that were sponsored, so you'd have like a show sponsored by General Electric or Texaco Oil or whatever. So I'm not sure if this was sponsored by like one person or if it
mm.
was like I guess whatever the equivalency was there for commercial breaks. But yeah, this video that we found, or I found, it was a pitch thing. The first 10 minutes of it was a pitch thing for different advertisers. They were showing upcoming episodes and what they were doing. And then at the end, they went into the pilot episode. But
Okay.
there's an episode that focuses on a guy that's all by himself on an island as punishment, and he has a female companion that's a robot. And at one
Yes.
point, Rod Serling says, you know, we don't, she's made of, plastic and wires and stuff, but we kind of leave it wide open as to the nature of their relationship. All we say is that she's a companion. So, they don't go, well, they, did the horizontal mambo 5 times every night. They just left it, they considered that stuff even then, because I'm sure, even though the TV was squeaky clean, the executives weren't necessarily that way.
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating. It's fascinating how
It
TV has
is.
changed. It's like
Like at one point they bring up Kimberly Clark, which is I think nowadays it's like paper products and things like that. I'm not sure back then what that would have been exactly.
but this episode it starts coming to a conclusion, because every episode except for the fourth season is about 20-25 minutes, and then you have your commercials. Where this episode kind of hits its peak and starts going down, down that mat, there's always the
Climax.
the rise. You have the peak, and then you have the conclusion that stuff starts happening. He walks into a movie theater, which is a big thing, of course, for the 50s and 60s, were movie theaters and whatnot. So as you're aware, all the big spooky sci-fi guys and caterpillar, not caterpillar, lobster suits or whatever, and I don't know, I'm naming shit off my top of my head, I can't remember, but
Well, this one he actually ends up he sees the feature was actually a Universal film from 1956.
oh,
And
was it?
then he realizes that he was in the Air Force and he's trying to figure out
Yeah.
what's going on. And then he goes a little nuts and runs into a mirror and then runs out. And then he's out in front of an optometrist office and sees a giant eye. And he gets a sense that he's being watched. And then, like, we see that he's being watched.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that the button he starts pressing is very similar to the button that he has in his little tank or whatever he's in, but he basically starts pressing the light button, and he's like, let me out of here, let me out of here, someone hear me, someone hear me. And this episode ends basically with a twist that he was in a sensory deprivation tank. Am I reading this right? For 484 hours?
Basically 2.5 weeks, yeah. Because that was they say at the end that it was the time that it would take to make it to the moon, make several orbits, and then come back.
That is crazy to think about. Think about being locked in a box.
I think it was a 5-foot box, they said.
Yeah. Think about being locked in a box. You're going to the moon. And it makes sense because the shuttles at the time were very, very small.
Mm-hmm.
But think about being locked in a box for 484 hours and you start hallucinating a town that has nothing. And he'll say this in the closing narration, but the idea of, they even say it when they're talking to him about how isolation can affect the mental stability of the human mind. Because, like I said, doing a podcast with 2-3 people is awesome, but doing it with one person can be quite depressing and sad and just kind of boring because you don't have anyone to kind of bounce off of. You're alone. You try, but it's just not the same. It's the same thing with being, living by yourself in an apartment like I did, and you have a phone to talk to. But imagine these people in the 50s and 60s, they don't have a phone, so they have no one to communicate with outside of the people in Houston or whatever. But it's pretty crazy to think about how this episode is basically talking about how we strive for human companionship, and when we don't have it, it causes us to lose our sanity in a lot of aspects.
Oh yeah, well, and they even mention how we can pump in air, we can take care of food and disposal, we can take care of all of these needs when you're out in outer space, but nothing can take the place of if you hear your own voice for that long and only your voice, nothing can affect isolation.
Yeah.
And I also have to add, how is it, so you're doing a podcast with a 2D character, how is that being alone, or is that with somebody?
Well, no, I mean,
kidding. Kidding.
I say when you turn, like it's almost like you're not there. You turn back around.
Yeah. Well, and too, like you talk about the world that he imagined, it is empty. Like there's no people. Yeah. But everything else, like he mentions at one point, he's in a malt shop and there's like a basketball or football schedule on the table, and he notes that, how can I be dreaming and have this level of detail in my dream?
It is interesting when you think about it, because you also like the mannequin, if you think about it's his kind of mental look into, for instance, when you live by yourself or you live isolation in the woods, or you're Tom Hanks in Castaway, you have a Wilson Ball. Yeah, you tend to start imagining that they're real, and he like talks to, he's like, oh, you're my kind of woman, I'm like, what is he doing? And
she's only half a person too. Like she's waist done up basically, and I can relate. Yeah.
He was only able to imagine half a mannequin.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, even like the prices of stuff, like there's like I want to go there just because like dinner or lunch was like 75 cents.
I know, right? Gas probably like 10 cents.
Oh, I know, right? And like furniture, like there was another place where like there was stuff for 15 cents, and it's like, dude, sign me up for that.
So I do have a question. I know they worked within the parameters of what they had available to them at the time, but is the idea of doing the town, having it be in a town with nobody, like the ultimate isolation? Or do you think there's if he made the movie or the show today, it would have a different setting or something like that? Like what's your take on why it was taking place in a town? Because they do towns a lot. He has towns a lot in his episodes. Like the incident takes place in a town, and I'm just curious, do you have any maybe kind of thoughts about that at all?
I guess I would say that, I mean, not that you don't have community now. Mm-hmm. Like back then, town was your community. You stopped and gabbed with people. If you went to the grocery store, it wasn't just 5 minutes in and out. It was a local place where you could be like, give me the usual, and they'd give you whatever you would normally order. It was a much more local experience in most cases, especially if you're talking small towns. I think that probably played into the, everybody's into everybody else's business. Everybody knows everybody. And all of a sudden, and it's a simple way to say, even unless you live out in the boondocks, you have to go to town for stuff. And I think that's probably like that sense of community, that population center. I think even if you're alone, you're still in a place where there are other people. And that's
Right.
always kind of, with any of these, I think it was the easiest way to pull the metaphor.
I don't know. I might have to look into this more because it's always fascinating me because for instance, the woman with the little robot invader people, she's living by herself in isolation and the countryside, and it's really interesting. I never even thought about that till.
And I think too, the other thing is that, like, it's the experience of that person. Like, you're seeing everything from their perspective. And, you go to a new town and there's that sense of isolation if you don't know anybody.
Yeah.
And I think that plays into, like, because he wandered. If you're new to a town, you wander, you kind of look around, you want to know your surroundings. And that's kind of what he did. And two, I think he's trying to do what everybody else does. You go to lunch, you go to the store, you go to the movies. He was in all those places.
Yeah.
He was trying to be normal.
Right. Interesting trivia. Tony Curtis wanted too much money, so he was not in the episode.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Actually, you were mentioning The Last Man on Earth was written by Richard Matheson, who wrote some Twilight Zone episodes, believe it or not. So
everybody back then, and maybe it's just the people that but it seemed like a lot of people did, like, it was a big thing to be on Twilight. It's about like being in an MCU movie today.
Yeah. I'm telling you, you go back and look at directors and writers for Tales from the Crypt, and if it has the right people behind it, Tales from the Crypt had, of course, Joel Silver and Robert Zemeckis and Walter Hill and stuff like that. So you go back and watch who they, Tom Hanks wrote and directed an episode, and
really,
yeah,
awesome.
You go back, like Bobcat Goldthwait directed an episode, which was kind of cool, and it's just, I think when a series like this has the potential that it has, and you look at who was able to work with, I think that's just shows you how important this show ended up becoming. But for the first episode, like I said, he wrote most of the episodes, and it's directed by a TV director, and doesn't have anybody famous. It has Earl Holliman, who I don't really know much about.
He was in a fair amount. Like, he seemed like a pretty, like, he wasn't an outstanding like say Charlton Heston or whatever, but I mean, he steadily worked. He did a lot of movies. Like, I recognized a lot of movies that he was in. So
yeah, and you started noticing a lot of these actors that are in here, a lot of them are stage actors as well, stage theater actors. So that's where the early TV actors came from, and were a lot more stage actors and stuff like that too. So
yeah.
But the closing narration, which is actually this episode didn't have really an opening narration. It just said the place is here, the time is now, the journey into shadows that we are about to watch could be our journey. And usually there is a kind of opening segment which will kind of lead you into the story itself, gives you a little bit of theory about what's going on, and then you have the closing narration, which is the barrier of loneliness. This kind of explains the whole entire episode, but the barrier of loneliness, the palpable desperate need of the human animal to be with his fellow man, up there in the vastness of space, in the void that is sky. Up there is the enemy known as isolation. It sits there in the stars, waiting for a patience of eons, for waiting in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
So basically it was bookends. He would give you kind of a starting point, and then he would close it out with the person dealt with this and blah blah blah, and it would go in the Twilight Zone, and the episode would end. So
well, and two, the other thing is they always, like, he always smoked. Like, you don't get so much that in this episode, but back then everybody smoked, and it was on camera, and it was right up front.
I mean, he's very, like, especially like you said in later episodes, he would have like his arms crossed like this, and he would have the cigarette, up like here or something like that. I hope I'm not doing something like really negative.
I mean, gang signs there.
Am I the Serling gang signs?
Yeah, there you go. We're part of the Twilight Zone, bitches.
But that became his thing. It became his way to talk to the audience, to give them a point of view or a point of reference to what the episode was going to do. He never gave what the episode was going to be about. Just kind of, here's a man, he's walking down the street, he's about to enter the Twilight Zone, and then the closing narration would be kind of a like an epilogue or a kind of rough
Like a
deciphering of
summation.
summation of what you have just watched. And this episode, I don't know how many episodes would end up doing this, but this was one of those episodes where he would come on after the episode and then would tell you about the next episode, which he doesn't do that for too long, but he's like, oh, watch out for the next episode. We hope you join us for one for the angels. And
I
I thought
love
that
that
was kind of,
episode so much.
dude, I don't remember that episode at all.
Now that one always stands out as a real fave for me, just because of
But
the people involved in it and everything. But
and
but
there's not, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say a couple other fun facts on this. For the time, it cost $75,000 to make, which regarded
Wow.
it was the first episode in the series,
Mhm.
and it's a little different. But they shot it in 9 days, and then it was music done, edited, and everything in 3 or additional 3.
Yeah, that's if you look at, unless the TV show has like huge production value, you can usually get an episode done in about 7-8 days and finished, like you said, 3-4 days, all the posts and stuff like that. But yeah, 9 days sounds about right. There's also the thing about 6:15, the shatter crystal that he hits, it says 6:15, the clock says 6:15, so it's kind of a little nice little foreshadowing. Well, I don't know if the 6:15 means anything, but
I'm not sure about that, but I just assumed that that's kind of when he broke. Like that's when his mind broke, was 6:15, and that's why he broke the clock in the sensor deprivation tank, and then the rest of everything happened pretty quickly after.
Did you ever watch Black Mirror?
I've seen bits, but not enough.
So you didn't watch the episode Playtest, did you?
No.
You care if I spoil it at all?
No, go for it.
So spoilers if you have not seen Black Mirror. So Wyatt Russell, who's in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, he's traveling across country in a different country, gets his wallet stolen. To make money, he goes to this famous video game developer and blah, blah, blah. They say he can't use his phone. He can't keep his phone in here and stuff like that. And he has this whole big adventure where he gets attacked by creatures and whatnot. And at the very end of the episode, he is killed. Well, the interesting thing about it is the phone comes on and he only lasted like 0.09 seconds before he died. So the whole adventure took 0.09 seconds, even though it was a 60-minute episode. And it's the same thing here. It's almost like the whole entire adventure took place in not even in a few seconds, but he imagined, the 6:15 and stuff like that. Because if the clock was cracked in the very beginning of the episode and then was cracked at the very end of the episode, there's a very good possibility that the whole entire episode took place within that, less than a second, portion of his life.
Exactly. Well, and it tells you about the commentary on dreaming too, how you can have like a very in-depth dream and you wake up and no time has passed. Like time is a weird thing.
I can't tell you how many times I've gone to sleep for like an hour and had like what seems like a 10-hour dream.
Oh yeah.
Wake up and it's only been like an hour. So it's weird how fast the brain, I'm not loony, but it's weird how fast the brain kind of perceives things as you sleep, because it's, people are like, oh, I'm going to rest my brain. Your brain is actually more active when you sleep because it's, refresh. I guess it's, if I remember right, like refreshes yourself or something like that. It helps, create a more stimulated world and, allows you to, rest at ease and stuff like that. Unless you have nightmares like I do with very high rainstorms and sometimes being chased after by mummies.
Don't do that. That's not good.
after we're done with this episode or this whole entire Twilight Zone series, we're gonna be like thinking about like clocks and eyeballs and stuff like that. So
I'll probably think of shattering windows and weird masks and the scary faces underneath said masks.
Yeah, all you need to do is ride the Tower of Terror for that one.
Oh, lovely. I've never been to Florida, so.
Oh man, it's such a good ride. I'm like scared of like of all kinds of roller coasters and what are they called, drop towers. But it's such a cool ride. It really is. But that is the episode. Like I said, for a first episode, it does a pretty nice job of setting up the overarching kind of storytelling narrative that Rod Serling is going to use when it comes to the other episodes that come down the line. Now, with that said, this isn't what I call the best episode in the world because it's really simple. Like, if you really think about it, the episode is really kind of in your face with what it's trying to do, but it's really, really simple in the fact that when you're watching it, you know there's something kind of truly off about the man himself, the ideas of what's going on with him. But as far as when it gets to the ending and you realize it's about isolation and about a man who's going to the moon, it really is a pretty simplified story. Because when you look at stuff like the Howling Man and you look at stuff like Willoughby and the Monster Do on Maple Street, there's a lot. If you agree, there's a lot going into those episodes that really make it kind of I don't know the word. I have no comps. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the philosophical backing. You look at a movie or a episode like Howling Man. It's there's a lot of not so much philosophy, but there's a lot of stuff that you bring into it. Like you get more of the symbolism as you're going along, and what it means if that Howling Man gets loose. There is a great deal more to it than what you have with something like this. But I do think this for the opening for a pilot at that point, like especially at that point in time and a time of B movies and everything else, I think it definitely stood out as something unique, especially at least on a TV level. Like you look at the B movies at the time, you got, you know, a fair amount of that. And like The Last Man on Earth and kind of stuff like that. Cause obviously if you didn't know what it was, that right there told you what you needed to know. But for TV, especially if you weren't a movie going person at that point, which, you know, I think more people were movie going people back at that point, but you did get more of that sense of things. But you know, the one thing that amazes me about the Twilight Zone, regardless of everything, it was never sarcastic. Like it's never cynical. You know, it says things pretty straightforward. It does have its moments of darkness and light, but it's never cynical about humankind and things like that.
I actually have a little bit of pushback. I think it's extremely cynical about human culture. We'll get down the line.
Well, there's cynicalness, but it's not like humans suck. You know, bomb them all to hell is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. No. I mean, I understand what you're. Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. It's just I think like, some of the episodes
good overcomes is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's the episode where famous episode, but he's a bookkeeper or whatever, and he
the glasses break. Yeah,
it's a very cynical look and how to f up an individual just trying to just enjoy.
The one thing that the series always left me with, like, you have a lot of stuff now, and by and large, and obviously there are gonna be other episodes, but like there is a hopefulness about it of, okay, people do bad stuff, but good will triumph, basically, overall.
Yeah, I know. I get what you're coming at. There's no. I have no problem with what you're saying at all. It's interesting when you kind of look at it from different point of views and different perspectives, and I'm really interested to see how we'll kind of look and kind of see how we kind of move through the course of the series as we move along, because there are 160 episodes in this first. We might, like I said, we might go down the line. I definitely want to do the movie because it plays off some of the original episodes, but
very much so.
But as of right now, this is the very first episode, and I think it's a good starting point. I think it's a good way to represent a series that became truly great on its own right.
Oh yeah,
I think it's one of the best pilots of any series I've ever seen, because it definitely worked on its first try. So
yeah. Well, and there is when he's taken off on the stretcher, you see him and he's like looking up at the moon and he's all like, "We'll see you soon." But yet, I don't know, like I ended it and it's just like there's that trepidation of, you're gonna go through this again. Your brain could break again and not be able to be pulled out of this thing. I mean,
well, it's kind of like the people who survive a tour of duty in war, and they're like so happy to be back, and they realize they just want to go back to the same thing that they were just in. It's like,
true.
You know, sometimes that's what human people do. We tend to put ourselves in those situations. That's why we work the same type of job, you know, every day of our lives, or, you know, keep going to the same type of job. So
very true.
But so this is one thing I really like. There is a podcast that I was listening to for a while until they became super cynical. But they did a really cool thing where they were ranking the entire series.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, they were going through like where would you put this episode, blah blah blah. So it's going to be a little difficult as we get more episodes, but it's basically rank the Twilight. That's all I have to name for it. Rank the Twilight Zone episodes.
Maybe do by
So,
season.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, we could do like the whole entire list, but also have a list of the season, like what the best episode is. So
that's why you're the guy that's got the Twilight Zone squiggle or the spiral in the background.
That's just my state of mentality right now.
That's okay. Mine is basically just a Starfield with Rod Serling looking over my shoulder.
Yeah, you have a much cooler. You have Rod Serling with half a face, and
yep.
All right. So with that said, with this being the very first episode, I can pretty much say that we think this is the best episode so far.
Well, I don't know. I think the Happy Place would have been a better episode, but I can't, Also, the pitch for all the advertisers, I would like to advertise with Rod Serling. So if he could get a hold of me, that would be great.
Exactly. Come back from the grave.
Yes, get your ass up here, Rod Serling zombie.
So for right now, where's everybody? You'll stick at number one, and like I said, it'll be a bloodbath as it goes later down the list. I do want to think
I'm already sharpening my sword.
We'll start arguing about the Night of the Lepers or whatever it's called with the Santa Claus. So, but with that said, do you have any closing thoughts on this episode? Anything else you wanted to talk about before we head out?
No, I think he looked good in a jumpsuit.
Yeah, they the jumpsuit. He's like, I'm an Air Force pilot. And he jumps through the glass. Like,
yes. I felt bad. Like that shot was genuinely kind of neat because, like, throughout, he talks on the phone. He sees the mannequin. He's in the theater and runs into the mirror. Like that part was like, oh, dude, he's gonna be coming from this one. All of a sudden, it's like crash. It was actually kind of a neat shot. So
it actually startled me at first because I thought that was the actual shot of him coming down the steps, not a reflection.
Yeah, exactly.
So the camera work is actually quite. That's another thing. Like with as big as the cameras were back in the day, they do some really nice kind of close-up shots. That's what Twilight Zone was really good at doing: close-up shots and having really interesting angles. And like I said, I thought that was an actual shot of him coming down the stairs when it was a reflection. So it actually did kind of work. So
yeah. And I actually thought like, so you knew, I mean, with any Twilight Zone episode, you can, your brain starts to go, okay, what is the thing behind this? Is it going to be aliens? Is it going to be a government experiment? What's going on with this? And I thought when they brought up the mirror, I assumed that when he broke through it, that there would be like people watching him on the other side, like a two-way mirror or something.
Yeah, because they like the phone ringing and stuff like that. I was like, oh, okay, so they're messing with them and stuff like that. And no, if he just was his brain broke.
Yep, basically.
Much the episode, so.
He needed a reset.
Yeah. So with that said, we'll end the episode there. I do appreciate everyone coming aboard to listen to this very crazy episode, being our first episode. We promise, or at least like we try to promise that we will not go off the rails. We'll try.
Would it not be the Twilight? I think you have to go off the rails because it is the Twilight Zone. Like if we don't end up in the Twilight Zone ourselves, there's something missing there, I would think.
Exactly. But we'll have more of a structure as the series goes along. Like I said, by the time we finish, like the last episode, we'll finally have the actual complete structure, and then the series will end, and we'll be like, we have to keep going.
Yes, it's like a pair of shoes that finally fits. Like you just get them to fit, and then the soles fall off.
Exactly. So the other thing, before we end, we'll try to keep this a weekly. Maybe we'll see how it goes. Maybe we have to do it bi-weekly, just depending on schedules, because we're doing our best to do this episode, but it's been kind of a lengthy process. So thank you for all you folks. You. But the next episode will be season 1, episode 2, which is One for the Angels, which Triv, you said you liked very, very much.
Love this episode. Yeah.
Stars Ed Wynn, Maury Hamilton. I like Maury Hamilton. Maury Hamilton's the asshole, the shark guy, and Jaws, the mayor.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I just really like Ed Wynn. I think he's a great character here. So
awesome. So with that said, before we end, Triv, where can they find you at again?
You can find me not in the Twilight Zone. I'm west of the Twilight Zone, north of the Outer Limits, and then you take a left at the Phantom Zone. No,
Excellent.
I'm here on YouTube at Trivial Theater. So just type that in and you'll find me. I'm pretty much the only one, I think. And then you can find me on Twitter at trivia_chick, and that's
Awesome.
CHIC.
And I did say you can find me at Big Shadow, but that's for a different podcast. So please ignore what I just said. You can find me at Movie Emporium. That's where I on Twitter. You can also find me at Movie Emporium on YouTube. I do movie content. Sometimes get yelled at by commenters. It's good times.
Yay.
But with that said, we'll see you hopefully the next week with One for the Angels. But otherwise, we'll see you in the Twilight Zone. Peace out.
Yes.